Kate Middleton stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, watching as aristocrats and dignitaries mingled effortlessly among crystal chandeliers and gilded walls. The sound of refined laughter and clinking champagne glasses filled the air, but, to her, it felt like a symphony playing in a foreign language. She smoothed down her navy blue dress, one that had cost her 3 months of savings from her part-time job at a London boutique, and tried to appear as though she belonged among these people who had been born into wealth and privilege. The University of St. Andrews had been her gateway into this world, where she first encountered Prince William during their art history classes. What began as casual conversations over coffee had slowly blossomed into something deeper, though she never imagined it would lead her to this moment. Standing in Buckingham Palace as William's girlfriend, feeling every bit the outsider she was constantly reminded she remained. "Oh, look what the cat dragged in," came a voice dripping with disdain from behind her. Kate turned to see Lady Victoria Pemberton, a woman whose family tree could be traced back to Norman conquest, approaching with 2 equally well-bred companions. Victoria's diamond necklace probably cost more than Kate's family home in Berkshire, and her smile held all the warmth of a winter morning. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight, Kate," Victoria continued, her voice carrying just loud enough for nearby guests to overhear. "Though I suppose they're letting anyone in these days. How refreshing to see the palace embracing such diversity." Kate felt her cheeks burn, but she maintained her composure. She had learned early in her relationship with William that showing weakness in front of these people was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. "Good evening, Victoria. You look lovely tonight," she replied, refusing to take the bait. "Thank you, darling. This old thing." Victoria gestured to her clearly expensive gown. "It's vintage Chanel, belonged to my grandmother. She actually knew the Queen Mother personally, you know. They used to have tea together every Tuesday for years. But then, again, I suppose you wouldn't understand that kind of history, would you? Your family's in trade, isn't that right?" The word trade was spoken as if Victoria had tasted something particularly unpleasant. Kate's parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, had built a successful party supply business from nothing, working tirelessly to provide their children with opportunities they themselves had never had. Kate was proud of their accomplishments, but in this world, honest work was somehow considered beneath those who had inherited their wealth. "Yes, my parents work very hard," Kate said, lifting her chin slightly. "They've built something wonderful together." "How quaint," one of Victoria's companions chimed in. "I heard your mother was actually a flight attendant before she married your father. Is that true? How terribly modern." Before Kate could respond, she felt a familiar presence beside her. William had appeared as if from nowhere, his jaw tight, and his blue eyes flashing with an anger that made the temperature around them seem to drop several degrees. He placed a protective hand on Kate's lower back, and she could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a furnace. "Victoria," William said, his voice deceptively calm, but with an underlying edge that made the other woman's smile falter slightly. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Were you perhaps discussing Kate's family?" "Oh, William, we were just getting acquainted with your friend." Victoria recovered quickly, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "I was telling her how interesting it must be to come from such a working background." William's expression darkened further. Kate had seen him angry before, but this was different. This was a cold, controlled fury that spoke of years of frustration and protective instincts pushed too far. "Friend," he repeated, the single word carrying enough weight to make several nearby conversations pause. "Kate is here as my guest, Victoria. She's here because I invited her, because I wanted her here, and because she belongs wherever I am." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, and her companions had suddenly found their champagne glasses fascinating. Other guests within earshot had turned to watch the exchange, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Victoria stammered, clearly realizing she had pushed too far. "I never meant to imply, didn't you?" William cut her off, his voice rising slightly before he caught himself. Kate could see him struggling to maintain his composure, his hands clenched at his sides. Because it sounded very much like you were questioning whether Kate belongs here. Let me be absolutely clear. She belongs here more than most of the people in this room. She's earned her place through her character, her intelligence, and her integrity, not through an accident of birth. The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Kate watched as Victoria's face cycled through several emotions: shock, embarrassment, and then a kind of calculating anger that suggested this wasn't over. Around them, the other guests had begun to murmur among themselves, some looking sympathetic, others clearly uncomfortable with the breach of social protocol. "William, perhaps we should," Kate began quietly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "No," he said firmly, though his voice softened when he looked at her. "This needs to be said." He turned back to Victoria and her group, and Kate could see the prince in him now, the future king who would not be challenged or dismissed. Kate's family built their success through hard work and determination. They created something from nothing, which is more than can be said for those who simply inherited their position. If you have a problem with that, if you think that somehow makes her less worthy, then perhaps you should examine your own values. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Around them, the crowd had grown thicker as more people became aware of the confrontation. Kate could see palace staff beginning to move in their direction, clearly concerned about the scene being caused. Furthermore, William continued, his voice carrying across the now quiet section of the ballroom, "I want to make something perfectly clear to everyone who might be listening. Kate is not just my guest tonight. She's the woman I love. She's brilliant, she's kind, she's genuine, and she possesses more nobility in her little finger than most people in this room will ever know. Anyone who suggests she doesn't belong here is suggesting that I don't know my own mind, and I find that deeply insulting." The collective intake of breath from the surrounding crowd was audible. This was more than just defending his girlfriend. This was William making a public declaration of his feelings and his intentions. Kate felt her heart racing, both from the stress of the confrontation and from hearing William speak about her with such passion and conviction. Victoria had gone from pale to flushed, clearly mortified by the very public dressing down she had received. "Your Royal Highness, I apologize if my words were misconstrued." "They weren't misconstrued," William said coldly. "They were perfectly clear. Now, if you'll excuse us, Kate, and I have other people to speak with. People who understand what really matters." He offered Kate his arm, which she took gratefully, and together they walked away from the group, leaving Victoria and her companions standing in stunned silence. As they moved through the crowd, Kate could feel eyes following them, hear the whispered conversations starting up in their wake. Some faces showed admiration for William's passionate defense. Others showed concern about the breach of protocol, and still others showed the kind of speculative interest that suggested this story would be making its way through London's social circles within hours. "You didn't have to do that," Kate said quietly as they found a quieter corner of the ballroom. William turned to face her, his hands coming up to gently cup her face. The anger was still there in his eyes, but it was mixed now with tenderness and something that looked like regret. "Yes, I did," he said firmly. "I couldn't stand there and let her speak to you that way. I couldn't let anyone think for even a moment that you don't belong here. But now everyone will be talking," Kate pointed out, though she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest at his words. "Let them talk," William said, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. "I'm tired of pretending that what other people think matters more than what's real. You and what we have together, that's what's real. That's what matters." As if to prove his point, an elderly gentleman approached them with a kind smile. Kate recognized him as the Duke of Marlborough, one of the most respected members of the old aristocracy. She braced herself for another confrontation, but instead, he extended his hand to her with genuine warmth. "Miss Middleton, isn't it?" he said, his voice carrying a gentle authority. "I wanted to tell you how much I enjoyed speaking with your mother earlier. She's a remarkable woman, sharp as a tack, and utterly charming. You should be very proud of your family." Kate felt tears prick at her eyes, both from relief and gratitude. Thank you, Your Grace. That means a great deal. Nonsense, he said with a dismissive wave. Good character recognizes good character, my dear. And, speaking of which, he turned to William with a knowing smile. That was well done, my boy. Sometimes these old fossils need reminding about what really matters. Your grandmother would have been proud. As the Duke moved on, Kate felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Not everyone here saw her as an interloper. Not everyone judged her by her family's background or the size of her bank account. But she also knew that Victoria Pemberton and her ilk weren't going away. If anything, tonight's confrontation had probably made things worse. There would be more whispers, more sideways glances, more subtle and not so subtle reminders that she was different, that she didn't belong in this rarefied world of hereditary titles and centuries-old fortunes. The evening continued around them, and Kate did her best to engage with the other guests, to prove through her grace and intelligence that William's faith in her wasn't misplaced. She spoke knowledgeably about art with a visiting curator from the National Gallery, charmed a group of diplomats wise with their genuine interest in their work, and even managed to coax a laugh from a notoriously stern cabinet minister. But throughout it all, she was acutely aware of the undercurrents, the way certain conversations stopped when she approached, the looks that passed between some of the more traditional members of the aristocracy. Victoria's words had stung not because they were particularly creative or cruel, but because they voiced what Kate knew many others were thinking. She was Carol Middleton's daughter, the girl whose mother had once served drinks at 30,000 feet. She was pretty enough, clever enough, but she would always be the outsider who had somehow captured the heart of the future king. To some, that would always make her a threat to the natural order of things. Later that evening, as they walked through the palace gardens in the cool night air, William's anger had finally begun to fade, replaced by a weariness that seemed to settle over him like a heavy cloak. I hate this, he said suddenly, stopping by a fountain and running his hands through his hair. I hate that you have to deal with people like Victoria. I hate that they make you feel like you have to prove yourself worthy of being here. Kate moved closer to him, her heart aching at the frustration in his voice. It's not your fault, William. Isn't it? He turned to her, his expression pained. I'm the one who brought you into this world. I'm the one who exposed you to these people and their poisonous attitudes. Sometimes I wonder if I've been selfish, asking you to be part of all this. The vulnerability in his voice made Kate's chest tighten. She reached up to touch his face, the same way he had touched hers earlier. You didn't ask me to be part of anything, she said softly. I chose this. I chose you. And yes, people like Victoria exist, and yes, they can be cruel and small-minded. But there are also people like the Duke of Marlborough, people who judge others by their character rather than their bloodline. William leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. When I heard her talking to you like that, when I saw the look on your face, he trailed off, shaking his head. I've never felt anger like that before. It was like something inside me snapped. I could tell, Kate said with a small smile. For a moment there, I thought you might actually challenge her to a duel. That earned her a rueful laugh. Don't think I wasn't tempted. The things I wanted to say to her, the things I wanted to say about her family's noble history that isn't quite as pristine as she likes to pretend. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of the fountain and the distant hum of the city beyond the palace walls creating a peaceful backdrop. Kate found herself thinking about the evening's events, about Victoria's words, and William's fierce defense, about the looks and whispers that would inevitably follow. What happens now? She asked eventually. William's arms came around her, pulling her close against his chest. Now we continue living our lives, he said firmly. We don't let people like Victoria dictate how we feel or what we do. We don't give them that power. But even as he spoke those confident words, Kate could hear the underlying uncertainty. They both knew that tonight had been more than just a social confrontation. It had been a preview of what lay ahead, a glimpse into the kinds of battles they would have to fight if their relationship continued to deepen. The palace loomed above them, magnificent and imposing against the night sky, a symbol of centuries of tradition and protocol. Somewhere within those walls, Kate knew The evening's events were already being discussed, analyzed, and probably reported up the chain of command. Tomorrow there would be questions, concerns, perhaps even suggestions about how to handle the situation going forward. But tonight, standing in William's arms under the stars, Kate felt a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Victoria Pemberton and her kind could whisper and scheme all they wanted. They could question her background, her worthiness, her right to be there. But they couldn't change the fact that William loved her truly and completely, enough to risk public confrontation to defend her. That knowledge would have to be enough to carry her through whatever challenges lay ahead. Because Kate was beginning to understand that this was only the beginning. If she wanted to build a future with William, if she wanted to prove that love could triumph over prejudice, and that worth could be measured by something other than bloodline, she would have to be stronger than she had ever imagined possible. The evening had shown her both the worst and best of the world she was trying to enter. Now it was up to her to decide whether she had the courage to keep fighting for her place in it. The morning after the palace reception dawned gray and drizzly, matching Kate's mood as she sat in her small Kensington flat, nursing a cup of tea and staring at the stack of newspapers her flatmate had thoughtfully purchased on her way to work. The headlines made her stomach churn with a mixture of anxiety and disbelief. Prince William's commoner love, palace showdown, screamed one tabloid, while another declared future king defends his girl. She belongs with me. The photographs, taken by some enterprising photographer with a long lens, showed the exact moment of William's confrontation with Victoria, his face a mask of barely controlled fury while Kate stood beside him, looking elegant but clearly uncomfortable. Kate's phone had been ringing nonstop since 6 in the morning. Her mother had called first, her voice tight with worry and barely concealed excitement. Her father had been characteristically calm, asking practical questions about security and whether she needed them to come to London. Her brother James had texted a simple message: "Bloody hell, Kate. You've really done it now." The tabloid coverage was brutal in its detailed dissection of her family's background. They had somehow obtained photographs of her mother in her British Airways uniform from 20 years ago, alongside current pictures of the Middleton family's successful party supply business. Everything was presented with the barely veiled suggestion that Kate was a gold digger who had somehow manipulated her way into the prince's affections. But it was the opinion pieces that cut the deepest, titled "Is Kate Middleton Really Princess Material?" and "The Commoner Problem: What William's Choice Says About Modern Monarchy." They questioned everything from her education to her character, analyzing her every public appearance, and finding her wanting in ways both subtle and explicit. A sharp knock at her door interrupted her brooding. Kate peered through the peephole to see two stern-looking men in expensive suits standing in the hallway. Her heart rate immediately spiked. Palace security had found her. "Miss Middleton," the older of the two men said when she opened the door. "I'm Robert Fellows, private secretary to the Queen. This is James Morrison from the communications office. We wondered if we might have a word." Kate invited them in, acutely aware of her modest surroundings as they settled themselves somewhat uncomfortably on her second-hand sofa. Fellows, a man who radiated the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of palace service, got straight to the point. "I'm sure you're aware that last night's events have generated considerable media attention," he began, his tone carefully neutral. "The palace is concerned about the potential impact on the prince and on the institution as a whole." Kate nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I understand. I never intended for any of this to happen." Morrison, younger but no less serious than his colleague, leaned forward. "Miss Middleton, we want you to know that no one blames you for last night's incident. Victoria Pemberton's behavior was entirely inappropriate. However, the situation has created certain complications." "What kind of complications?" Kate asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The prince's public defense of your relationship has been interpreted by the media as a declaration of serious intent," Fellows explained. "This has accelerated timelines that we had hoped to manage more gradually. There are now expectations, both from the press and from certain members of the royal family, about the future direction of your relationship with Prince William." Kate felt a chill run down her spine. Are you saying that William is being pressured to make some kind of decision about us?" The two men exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Morrison cleared his throat. "What we're saying, Miss Middleton, is that the informal nature of your relationship with the prince is no longer sustainable. Last night changed things. The public now views you as a potential future princess, and that brings with it certain responsibilities and expectations. We're here today to discuss how we might help you navigate this new reality," Fellows added, though his tone suggested this help might come with strings attached. There would need to be media training, protocol lessons, security arrangements. Your entire life would need to be restructured to accommodate your new status. Kate stared at them, the weight of their words settling over her like a lead blanket. "And if I'm not prepared to do that?" Another meaningful look passed between the men. "Then, perhaps," Morrison said carefully, "it will be kinder to everyone involved to step back before things progress any further. The prince is young, and there will be other opportunities for him to find a suitable partner, someone who might be better equipped to handle the pressures of royal life." The conversation continued for another hour, with the palace officials outlining in detail exactly what Kate's life would become if she chose to continue her relationship with William. Every aspect of her existence would be scrutinized, from her clothing choices to her friendships to her family's business dealings. She would need to give up her job, her independence, her privacy. She would essentially cease to be Kate Middleton and become a public figure whose every move would be analyzed and criticized. After they left, Kate sat in her silent flat, staring at the business card Fellows had left behind. On it was a phone number and a simple message, "For when you've made your decision." Her phone rang again, and this time it was William. His voice was tight, with barely controlled anger when she answered. "They came to see you, didn't they?" he said without preamble. "This morning," Kate confirmed. "Two men from the palace, Fellows and Morrison." William's tone made it clear what he thought of their visit. "Kate, I want you to know that I had nothing to do with this. I'm furious that they went behind my back. They weren't unkind," Kate said carefully. "They were just honest about what my life would become." "And what did you tell them?" Kate hesitated. "I told them I needed time to think." The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, William spoke, his voice softer but no less intense. "Kate, I need you to know something. What happened last night, what I said to Victoria and everyone else there, I meant every word. I love you. I want to build a life with you. But I also understand what that life would entail, and I won't pressure you into accepting something you're not sure you can handle. I love you too," Kate said, tears beginning to blur her vision. "But, William, I'm scared. Not of the media attention or the protocol or any of that. I'm scared that I'll never be good enough for them. That people like Victoria will always see me as an outsider who doesn't belong." "Then they're fools," William said fiercely. "You're better than any of them, Kate. You're real in a way that most of the people I've grown up with have never been. You've earned everything you have through your own merit, not through accident of birth. That makes you more royal than half the people who hold titles." After the call ended, Kate found herself walking through Hyde Park, needing fresh air and space to think. The autumn leaves crunched under her feet as she made her way to the Serpentine, where she and William had shared so many quiet moments during their university holidays in London. She thought about her parents, about how proud they had been when she was accepted to St. Andrews, about the sacrifices they had made to give their children opportunities they themselves had never had. Michael and Carol Middleton had built their success from nothing, creating a thriving business through hard work and determination. They had raised their children to be confident, capable, and kind. But would that be enough for the world Kate was being asked to enter? Would her middle-class upbringing and normal family ever be acceptable to people who trace their lineages back centuries and consider trade to be beneath their notice? As she sat by the water, watching the ducks paddle peacefully across the lake, Kate was approached by an elderly woman walking a small terrier. The woman smiled kindly and asked if she could share the bench. "Beautiful day for a walk, isn't it?" the woman said, settling beside Kate. "Though you look like you have something weighing on your mind, dear." Kate found herself oddly comforted by the stranger's gentle manner. Just thinking about some big decisions I need to make. Ah, the woman nodded sagely. Those are the hardest kind. May I ask what sort of decisions? Without really meaning to, Kate found herself telling the woman about her dilemma, speaking in general terms about whether to accept a life that would require giving up everything familiar and comfortable for something grand but uncertain. It sounds like you're in love, the woman observed with a knowing smile. I am, Kate admitted. Very much so. And he loves you too? Yes, I believe he does. The woman was quiet for a moment, watching her dog chase a particularly interesting leaf. My dear, I've lived long enough to see many kinds of love stories. Some end in happiness, others in heartbreak, and most fall somewhere in between. But I've learned that the stories worth telling are the ones where people choose to fight for what matters to them, even when the odds seem impossible. But what if I'm not strong enough? Kate asked. What if I try and fail? Then you'll have tried, the woman said simply. And that's more than most people can say. Besides, she added with a mischievous glint in her eye, you strike me as stronger than you know. Sometimes we don't discover our true courage until we're forced to use it. As the woman gathered her dog and prepared to leave, she turned back to Kate with a warm smile. Whatever you decide, my dear, make sure it's your decision. Don't let fear or other people's opinions choose for you. Love is rare enough in this world. When you find the real thing, it's worth fighting for. After the woman left, Kate remained by the lake as the afternoon faded into evening. She thought about William's passionate defense of her the night before, about the way he had looked at her when he spoke about love and belonging. She thought about the palace officials and their barely veiled suggestion that she step aside for someone more suitable. But mostly, she thought about herself, about the woman she was and the woman she wanted to become, about whether she had the strength to forge her own path in a world that seemed determined to reject her. Her phone buzzed with a text message from William. Whatever you decide, I'll understand. But I hope you decide to stay and fight with me. Kate stared at the message for a long time, then slowly typed a reply. I'm scared, but I'm not ready to give up yet. His response came immediately. Good. Neither am I. As she walked home through the darkening streets of London, Kate felt something solidifying inside her chest. It wasn't confidence exactly. That would take time to build. But it was determination, a quiet resolve to prove that love and worth couldn't be measured by bloodlines or bank accounts. She didn't know what the future would hold, or whether she would ultimately be strong enough to survive in William's world. But she knew that she wasn't going to let fear or prejudice make the decision for her. If the palace and people like Victoria Pemberton wanted her gone, they would have to do better than veiled threats and social intimidation. Kate Middleton was going to fight for her place in this story, and she was going to do it on her own terms. The girl who didn't belong was about to show them exactly what she was made a point 3 months after the palace confrontation. Kate found herself standing in the anteroom of Clarence House, waiting to meet Prince Charles for what she knew was essentially an audition for the role of future daughter-in-law. The autumn sunlight streaming through the tall windows did little to warm the formal space, with its carefully arranged antique furniture and portraits of long-dead royals staring down at her with what felt like judgment in their painted eyes. She had spent weeks preparing for this meeting, working with the media trainer and protocol specialist the palace had assigned to her. Every aspect of her appearance had been carefully considered, from the conservative navy suit that conveyed respectability without ostentation to the simple pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. Even her posture had been adjusted, shoulders back, chin up, hands clasped loosely in front of her. But no amount of preparation could calm the nervous energy that coursed through her as she waited. This meeting would determine not just her future with William, but her entire life's trajectory. Prince Charles had the power to give his blessing to their relationship, or to make it clear that she would never be welcomed into the royal family. The door opened, and a private secretary gestured for her to enter. Prince Charles stood behind an imposing desk in what was clearly his personal study, surrounded by watercolor paintings, books, and the accumulated artifacts of a life lived in the public eye. He was smaller than she had expected, but his presence filled the room with an authority that made Kate acutely aware of her own nervousness. "Miss Middleton," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Please sit down. Thank you for coming." "Thank you for agreeing to see me, Your Royal Highness," Kate replied, settling into the chair and fighting the urge to fidget with her hands. Prince Charles studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I trust you understand why I wanted to meet with you," he said finally. "The events of recent months have made it clear that your relationship with William has reached a significant juncture. The media attention, the public speculation, it's reached a point where we can no longer treat this as a casual university romance." Kate nodded, choosing her words carefully. "I understand the situation is complicated, sir. I never intended for things to become so public so quickly." "No, I don't imagine you did," Charles said, settling back in his chair. "But, intentions aside, we find ourselves where we are. My son has made his feelings quite clear, both privately and publicly. The question now is whether you truly understand what you will be taking on." For the next hour, Prince Charles subjected Kate to what could only be described as a gentle but thorough interrogation. He asked about her family, her education, her values, her understanding of royal duty and public service. But, more than her answers, he seemed to be studying her character, watching how she handled the pressure, whether she remained genuine under scrutiny. "Tell me about your parents' business," he said at one point, his tone neutral but attentive. Kate straightened slightly, recognizing the potential minefield in the question. "They started party pieces from our kitchen table when I was quite young," she said with quiet pride. "My mother saw a gap in the market for quality party supplies delivered by mail order. She and my father worked incredibly hard to build it into what it is today, a successful company that employs dozens of people and brings joy to families celebrating important moments." "And you're not embarrassed by this background?" Charles asked, his eyes sharp and assessing. "No, sir," Kate said firmly. "I'm proud of it. My parents taught me the value of hard work, determination, and treating people with respect regardless of their station in life. They showed me that success isn't about where you start, but about how willing you are to work for what you believe in." Something in Charles's expression shifted slightly, a hint of approval that gave Kate hope. "The institution we're discussing joining is ancient and complex," he continued. "It demands sacrifices that most people cannot imagine. Privacy becomes a luxury of the past. Every decision you make, every word you speak, every appearance you make becomes subject to public scrutiny and criticism. Are you prepared for that level of exposure?" Kate took a deep breath. "I won't pretend that the thought doesn't frighten me, Your Royal Highness. But I've learned something about myself in recent months. When something matters enough, when someone matters enough, I'm capable of being stronger than I knew. William matters to me more than my privacy or my comfort." "And what about children?" Charles asked, leaning forward. "If you were to marry William, your children would be born into a life of duty and expectation from their very first breath. They would never have the choice to be ordinary that you had. How do you feel about that responsibility?" The question hit Kate like a physical blow. She had thought about marrying William, about building a life together, but the reality of raising future monarchs was something she had tried not to dwell on too deeply. "I think," she said slowly, "that all parents want to give their children the tools to handle whatever life brings them. If I were blessed enough to have children with William, I would want them to grow up understanding both the privilege and the responsibility of their position. I would want them to be grounded in real values, to understand that their role is about service to others, not personal glory." Prince Charles was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made Kate feel as though he was seeing straight through her carefully constructed composure to the person underneath. "You know," he said finally, "you remind me of someone I once knew. She also came from outside our world, also faced criticism about her background and her suitability. She also had to find the courage to forge her own path in an institution that wasn't always welcoming to outsiders." Kate's breath caught. She realized he was talking about Diana. "She made mistakes," Charles continued, his voice softening with what might have been regret. "We all did. But She also brought something to the monarchy that it desperately needed, a connection to ordinary people, a genuine warmth that couldn't be taught or manufactured. She reminded us that royalty is most powerful when it serves as a bridge between tradition and the modern world. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden beyond. I've watched my son grow into a remarkable young man, and I've seen how he's changed since meeting you. He's more grounded, more sure of himself. He smiles more genuinely than I've seen in years. That's not something to dismiss lightly. Kate felt tears prick at her eyes, but blinked them back. I love him very much, sir, and I want to be worthy of that love. The question isn't whether you're worthy, Charles said, turning back to her. The question is whether you're willing to do what it takes to succeed in this role. Because I won't lie to you. There will be people who will never accept you. There will be critics who will scrutinize your every move. There will be moments when you question whether the sacrifice is worth it. I understand, Kate said, though she knew her understanding was still theoretical. Do you? Charles challenged gently. Because once you take this step, there's no going back to being a private citizen. Your life becomes public property. Your mistakes become national news. Your successes are attributed to the institution rather than to you personally. It's a strange existence, and not everyone is suited for it. Kate met his gaze steadily. I know I can't fully understand what it will be like until I'm living it, she said. But I know that I want to try. I know that William and I together are stronger than either of us alone. And I know that I want to spend my life being useful, making a positive difference in whatever way I can. Prince Charles returned to his desk, picking up a leather folder that had been sitting there throughout their conversation. I've had investigators look into your background, he said matter-of-factly, causing Kate's stomach to lurch. I hope you don't find that offensive, but it's a necessary precaution. Kate shook her head, though she felt a chill of apprehension. I understand. The report makes for interesting reading, Charles continued, opening the folder. Academically gifted, but not arrogant about it. Popular with your peers, but not someone who seeks attention for its own sake. Loyal to your friends, devoted to your family. No financial irregularities, no questionable associations. A young woman of good character who has earned respect through her actions rather than demanding it because of her position. He closed the folder and looked at her directly. It also reveals something else. You've had opportunities to sell your story to the tabloids, chances to cash in on your relationship with my son for considerable sums of money. You've turned down every such offer without even considering them seriously. That speaks to an integrity that is unfortunately rare in our experience. Kate felt a wave of relief wash over her. I would never do anything to hurt William or your family. I believe you, Charles said simply. Which brings me to the real reason for today's meeting. William has spoken to me about his intentions regarding you. He's asked for my blessing to propose marriage. Kate's heart stopped. She had known their relationship was serious, but hearing it stated so plainly was overwhelming. I've told him, Charles continued, that he has my blessing, provided that you truly understand what you're agreeing to. This conversation today was as much for my benefit as for yours. I needed to see for myself that you have the strength of character to handle what lies ahead. And what's your conclusion? Kate asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Prince Charles smiled for the first time since she had entered the room, and the transformation was remarkable. My conclusion is that my son has chosen very well indeed. You're not what the establishment might have expected in a future princess, but perhaps that's exactly what the monarchy needs. Fresh perspective, genuine warmth, and the kind of authentic connection to ordinary people that can't be manufactured. He stood, signaling that the meeting was coming to an end. There will be challenges ahead, Kate. There will be people who will test your resolve and your character. But I believe you have the strength to face them. More importantly, I believe you and William together can help guide the monarchy into the future it needs to embrace. As Kate rose to leave, Charles added one final thought. Remember that you don't have to become someone else to succeed in this role. The strength you've shown today, the values you've described, those are your greatest assets. Don't let anyone convince you to abandon them in favor of fitting some preconceived notion of what a princess should be. Walking out of Clarence's house, Kate felt as though she was floating. The autumn air was crisp and clean, and London looked different somehow, more vibrant, more full of possibility. Her phone buzzed with a text from William. "How did it go?" She typed back quickly. "I think it went well. Very well." His reply came immediately. "I love you. Always have, always will." As she made her way back through the city streets, Kate reflected on the conversation that had just taken place. Prince Charles had been far more understanding and supportive than she had dared to hope. But more than that, he had helped her understand something crucial about herself and her future role. She didn't need to transform herself into some idealized version of royalty. She needed to be Kate Middleton, the woman William had fallen in love with, the daughter Michael and Carol Middleton had raised with strong values and genuine character. That authenticity, rather than being a liability, might actually be her greatest strength. The challenges Charles had warned her about were real, and Kate knew she would face them sooner rather than later. But for the first time since this journey began, she felt truly ready to meet them head-on. She had the love of a remarkable man, the blessing of his father, and, most importantly, a clear sense of who she was and what she could offer. The girl who had been told she didn't belong was about to prove that belonging wasn't about bloodlines or bank accounts. It was about character, commitment, and the courage to be genuinely yourself in a world that often demanded conformity. Kate Middleton was ready to show them what that looked like.